Welcome to the Apple a Day podcast. My name is Michelle Apples. If you don't know me, I am the founder of the Christian Singles Hub, a space where Christian singles can be equipped with the resources they need to grow towards greatness, put their faith in action, and to date with purpose. Healthy relationships only come from healthy individuals. So join me every Wednesday as we interview some incredible guests and give you all the wisdom you need to steward your singleness better. We hope you enjoy the show, and don't forget to check out our website at thechristiansingleshub.com. Welcome back to another episode of an Apple a Day podcast. My name is Michelle Apples, and I'm your host. If you don't know me, I am the founder of the Christian Singles Hub, which is a business I started back in 2020, and we do all sorts of things. We have an annual summer camp coming up, which is going to be so much fun. We already have so many people signed up, which is awesome. Apart from that, we do in-person events, we do virtual events, we do matchmaking, dating coaching, you name it, we do it. So glad you're here. Make sure you check out our website at thechristiansingleshub.com for all of the info there. Today, I have a special guest. I have my husband on. The reason that I brought him on to today's episode is I feel like we get a lot of questions about marriage, being newly married. How do we prepare for marriage? What's marriage like? And so today, we are going to spill all the tea on being newlyweds, what that looks like, especially living in a box, as we're on a full US tour right now, living in an RV, some of the struggles that we've had, some of the insights, reflections that we've had, and some of the things that helped us back in our singleness that now we can actually see have become fruitful in marriage. So, welcome to today's
Thanks.
podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I get to be on here every once in a while, and it's fun.
Yeah, he
hmm
loves doing podcasts. So glad to have him.
Yeah.
So, marriage. Let's talk all things marriage.
All right.
So, I think what's been your one like biggest revelation about marriage that maybe you didn't expect?
I think I get asked this question a lot, and my answer always is I think the world has told us that marriage isn't fun. Like, marriage is,
Explain that a little bit because
yeah,
obviously as a single, people are like dying to get married. Like they're like eager to get married. So,
yeah.
maybe they haven't heard that.
Yeah, so I think, and I'll explain a little bit more too on what you asked. And the reason why I say that though is that um, you hear like, oh, the ball and chain, or you hear all these different phrases that people use for marriage, and so that instantly makes me think, well, marriage isn't any fun. It's just like I can't do what I want to do now. It's like you're almost like put into this like box of like your life is over.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's kind of like what people say when they have kids, like, oh, your life's over. And it's like, no, really, is it? I don't think it is. It's just
Unless you choose.
how you choose to live it. And so for me, I was single, and so were you. And I think, yeah, you want this thing of marriage because everybody makes it out that like that's the next step. You're single and then you're married. And yeah, I think it's marriage is amazing, but the one thing I would say is that you have to put the work in order for it to really be amazing.
Yeah.
And if you don't do the work ahead of time, it's going to be so much harder to get to a point of where it is going to be amazing. And I think that's where a lot of couples struggle is like they're doing the work once they're married and they're trying to figure
Yeah.
everything out. Whereas I look at us and, we really did the work before we even met one another.
Yeah.
And
It's
then
good.
we did a ton of work because we spent so much time together and really got to know each other. So when we did get married, it was like, wow, this is amazing. Like marriage is incredible. I love it. It's so fun when God brings you your person. So yeah, I think that would be my biggest thing is like this is a lot of fun. Like I love it.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned like we put the work in. One of the things that really stood out to me and like why I knew like marriage, walking into marriage, like we were ready for that step and like it wasn't this haphazardly thing that we were doing. Was like our pastors actually made us work through this book while we were engaged. And so we were working through this book, and we both had a book and had to work through it separately, and then we had to come together and share our answers.
Mhm.
And we literally were laughing the whole book through because we were
Yeah.
like, what these that people don't talk about
Yeah.
this? Like, what?
Yeah.
How do people not talk about this? And we were talking to our pastors about it, and also a couple that they had to that counseled us during that phase
Mhm.
of engagement. And we were asking them, like, do people really not talk about these things before they get married? And they were like, you would be so
Yeah.
surprised of what people do not communicate, what people do not talk about.
Mhm.
But a lot of people, I think, are just not even self-aware. I think the
Yes.
first step is becoming self-aware. That's why you do the book individually.
Mhm.
So you're not just doing it based on what he says. You're not just doing it based on, but it's really getting to know, like, what is your heart posture?
Mhm.
Getting to be so self-aware that now you're able to talk things out. But I think we both were that way. We were both self-aware. It wasn't that we were trying to please each other. We weren't trying to get to a place of like, oh, we gotta make sure we fit together. It was like,
No.
no, we fit so naturally because we both were so
Mhm.
self-aware and were able to communicate those desires, those fears, those triggers, those
Yeah.
things that came up. And so it made for really healthy communication while we were dating.
Mhm.
And so we finished that book, and we just literally, like, I think I finished the book so quickly
Yeah.
because I was like, we've talked about all of this. Like, there
Yeah.
was not one thing in the book that we had not talked about.
Mhm.
And so that to me was such confirmation that we were like, both of our heart postures were ready. We had communicated everything we needed to communicate,
Mhm.
had to walk into marriage confidently, knowing that like there isn't so many surprises. Like, I hear so many people say like the first year of marriage is so
Yes. Yeah,
hard.
yeah.
The first year of marriage is such a struggle. Well,
Yeah.
I don't think it has to
No.
be that way. Like, we're having a blast on our
Yeah.
first year of marriage. And like, yes, we're learning and we're growing and we're developing and we're evolving as a couple, especially as we're living in an
Yeah.
RV and we're traveling around and we're in such tight quarters
Yeah.
and we're like together 24 hours a day, and we don't really have those outlets of like going to do things by ourselves
Mhm.
at this moment in where God has us. But it's like there's never been a time where I'm like, oh my gosh, marriage, the first year of marriage is so hard. I'm like, this is so fun.
Yeah.
It's so fun when you marry your best friend. You're on the same page as each other.
Mhm.
You've communicated things already. So it's like, yes, you're always learning, and yes, you're always growing, and yes, you're always discovering. But at the same time, like, it's not this like mind-blowing thing because we haven't talked about it. It's like, oh, it's not hard.
Mm-mm. Yeah, the word that keeps coming up is, and you read it or you hear a lot of book titles titled this, and it's dating with purpose. Like, are we dating to figure these things out, or are we just Netflixing and chilling and going to this and doing that and really not getting to know one another, but yet we're just going out because we want someone to come with us and not feel like we're
Yeah.
alone at an event.
Yeah, it's and the fun stuff is great. Like, have
Absolutely.
fun together. We
Yeah.
had so much fun together while we dated,
Yeah.
but we also spent time like intentionally getting to know each other,
Hmm.
intentionally getting to know, asking those harder questions, communicating those things. And I feel like people do not do this enough. But again, I want to go back to like, I think that a lot of times people aren't self-aware that they don't even know what they want. So therefore, then they don't know how to express or communicate what
Yeah.
they want because they don't know themselves. And I had a conversation with someone the other day, and I had to ask her, quite a hard question, and she didn't really know the answer, and that's a problem.
Mm.
Is like, if you don't know where you stand, you don't know what you want, you don't know where you're going, how in the world are you going to make sure that you're aligned with someone else and making sure that you're equally yoked walking
Hmm.
together? And I think that's the most important thing, is like, ask yourself the hard questions, like, do you want to get married?
Yeah.
Or is it something that you literally have been placed on you
Yeah.
of like, oh, this is the next step, so this is what I have to do?
Mhm.
Or like, the Bible says that marriage is a blessing, so therefore I have to get married. No, if God
Right.
hasn't called you to marriage, like there's a reason for that, and it's beautiful,
Yeah.
and it's like don't put yourself in a box of I have to. I've had a lot of those hard conversations with people too, of being like, oh, I have to buy a house because that's where I should be at this point in my life. Or, oh, I have to go freeze my eggs because I'm getting older and this is what I'm supposed to do. And I'm going to spend so much money doing so because I feel like that's what I'm supposed to do. But do you even want kids? Is
Yeah.
that even what you want, or is that what you think you want because that's what you've been told your whole life is like
Mhm.
you're going to get married, you're going to have kids and like that's it. And I'm here to tell you like I know singles hate the question of like, "Oh, why are you still single? Oh, when are you going to get married?" It doesn't stop when you get married. All it does is go to the next thing. You know how many times people literally ask us, "When are you guys gonna have kids? Oh, when you have kids, when you have kids." They automatically assume
Mhm.
that's just what we're gonna do. I mean, I've had people literally pray over our babies without even asking us if we plan on having kids.
Yeah.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
I just feel like you have to go to the Lord and see, God, what do you want from us?
Mm,
What is your desire for us? And what does that look like and lead us into that. And so I think taking those things to the Lord to really figure out if it's just a label that has been placed on you, or if it's something that you truly
mm,
desire and you feel like God is calling you to it. Because
yeah.
the worst thing you can do is get out of alignment with God's will for your life because of what others believe you're supposed to do. And this is, I believe, why we have so many really bad parents out there. We have so many really bad relationships out there
Mm,
because people are like, "Oh, I'm getting too old and I'm supposed to have kids. So I'm just going to settle for the first person that, shows interest and get married. Marriage is for life. You do not want to settle and marry the wrong person. I'm going to have,
yeah.
just pop out babies because that's what I believe I'm supposed to do because that's what the world has told me to do." Well, no, if God has not called you to it, like, I think that I've seen mothers, incredible mothers who truly like their purpose was to have babies and raise world changers, and it's a beautiful thing,
Mm,
like stunning thing when that's something you feel called to.
yeah.
And it's beautiful, but don't put yourself in that box of like this is what I'm supposed to do. Really take those desires to the Lord and see if those desires are actually your desires and your desires from the Lord,
Mhm.
or if they're just labels that have been placed on you your entire life.
So good. Yeah. Because 9 times out of 10, it's probably a label that you're thinking that you need to do because that's what the world's telling you.
Yeah.
But be bold and be brave and don't.
Yeah, I think so often too when actually people take it to the Lord and they go, "Oh, actually, I don't know if that's what I was supposed to do," or "I don't know if
Mhm.
that's actually what, I feel like I'm led to do." And again, if that is a desire you have, amazing.
Yeah.
But, make sure it is the desire that the Lord has given you and a desire that you have in your heart. And that's God's will for your life. Because, like I said, the worst thing you can do is step out of alignment of God's will for your life. Um, and so we talked about like the work that we put in our singleness.
Yeah.
What does that look like? What did that practically look like? What kind of work did you do? And then I'll share what kind of work I did and how did that translate and come together to help us today?
Yeah, I think it starts with prayer and really taking some time to reflect on, what are some of the things that you're struggling with and why do you keep struggling with them? And bringing that to the Lord and really just laying at his feet and being vulnerable and saying, God, like I want your help in this. Michelle's and I've shared my story quite a bit. But like I struggled with pornography and lust and masturbation and so it was one of those things I tried to fix on my own, and we all know that we can't do anything in our own strength. It just will keep coming back. And so I brought that to the Lord and was just like, God, like I was on my hands and knees many times in tears and just saying like I can't do this on my own. But I knew that I needed a savior and somebody that could basically break those chains and allow me to walk forward in a feeling of like peace and knowing in my soul that like, okay, I've got this and I have a savior that's going to walk through this with me. I'm not alone anymore. Um and then it's really just taking time. Like I think so often it's like we gotta just get in a relationship because that's what everyone's doing. So I'm gonna do that. But I'm telling you that the work, if you take time off of dating and just focus on yourself, it is one of the best things in the world because it allows you to really find out who you are. I think for me, it was leaving Minnesota and coming to Nashville. I was alone and by myself. And I think that can be a scary moment, but it can be the most transformational moment as
Hmm.
well because now you're out of your comfort zone and you're in a place of like, okay, God, it's just me and you. And I don't know anybody here and I have a lot of time on my own. Like I had so much time. And then it was during the pandemic too. um and so it was just like that quality time with the Lord that I got to spend and really got to know him and read scripture. I mean, I spent hours in the Bible. I was like constantly in the word and I was volunteering at church and volunteering outside of church. I was just getting my hands in anything I could possibly do um, to really just keep walking this journey out and to almost just yeah, like I gave everything to the Lord and was just like, okay, God, the past is the past, and now I'm walking forward. I read a lot of books. I Michelle tells us too, but I had like 40 to 45 books on marriage and on dating and uh, you name it.
And they
Like
were all faith related
yeah,
books too.
faith related books. And because I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't know what marriage looked like. I didn't know what a godly marriage looked like. I didn't know what sex looked like or what God framed sex to be. Like, I didn't know any of these things. So
Mm,
I had to learn, what does it look like to be a godly man? What does it look like to like walk into marriage and not like just sleep around. I mean, I wasn't sleeping around, but like that, it's learning those things of like, what does the Bible say that we should live? And then I started living according to that.
mhm.
And I think a lot of times people can get very like, what do they say? It's religious, or it's almost like this like, okay, I got to do this and I got to do that and I got to do this, instead
Yeah.
of really just like having a relationship with the Lord and knowing that like it's okay if you fail, like he's going to pick you up and it's a journey. um so yeah, I think really just not focusing on needing somebody and just using the time. I heard somebody say something once. They said, your singleness is the best time for you to do what you want to do whenever, like whenever. And it's like doing the Lord's work. So like I got to go volunteer at a youth camp. I took a week off and went and did that. Now, like being married, it's, like those things are harder to do. Or like if
Mm,
I wanted to go to Australia and go just go over there. Like I could just fly to Australia and I wouldn't have to second guess it.
mhm.
Now, like you have a partner and you have to be there for that person and you have to make sure that those things align. So yeah, I think it's just using your time wisely in your singleness and not don't try to run past it. Like
Yeah, that's good.
be in it and really immerse yourself in it, and God will tell you when you're ready to move to that next season.
Yeah, and I almost want to comment on that because I think everyone is in a different place and there's no formula
No.
for dating. Which a lot of other dating coaches will give you formulas. Don't listen to them because the formula is whatever God leads you to do. You need to walk out in obedience. And that's going to be different for everyone. Maybe you have had a very long singleness and single season where you have been focusing on yourself and now it's time to put yourself out there and like stop being so afraid of that.
Mm,
Because and again, it's like Douglas talking from his experience that he had things to heal from, so he needed that single time to really heal and do the work. And I was single for a long time too, and I really needed to heal and do work on myself as well before I ever got into this relationship that led to marriage. And but yeah, I think everyone is so different, and so to really take that to the Lord and say, God, where am I at? Do I need to heal from something? Do I need to take time and intentionally just seek you? Do I need to actually put myself out there because I've just been literally laying here complacent and I
Yeah.
desire to be married. I know I desire to be married, but I'm not doing anything about that.
Mm.
Because I see people on both sides of the coin
Yeah.
where there are people that absolutely need to just take time off of dating, go and do your healing work, do the work that you need to do before you get into a relationship because healthy marriages come from healthy individuals,
Yeah.
first and foremost. And so, but on the flip side of that, I also see people who literally I go on and I talk about dating and people's like, what's a date? Haven't done that in 10 years. It's like,
Mm.
well, why is that? Like, okay, then that's what you need to be
Yeah.
working on and figuring out. Okay, are you so afraid to put yourself out there? Are you so afraid to like actually talk to the opposite sex? Like, what does that look like? I know people who felt like they needed to download dating apps because they did not know how to just talk to the opposite
Mm.
sex. And so they did that and used that as a tool, right? And so I think we're all in different places. And so being able to take that to the Lord in prayer and figuring out where it is that you are and then doing the work in that area.
Mm.
And so this is just our stories
Yeah.
that we share, the things that we did and things God revealed to us. Your story may look very different, and that's between you and the Lord.
Mhm.
And so for me, some of the things, I had a really rough childhood, and my father abandoned me at a very young age, and told me he didn't want me anymore. So it left a lot of father wounds. It left a lot of like, how would anyone love me if my own father didn't love me?
Mm.
And it was really until I had the God encounter that I was able to have that love from a heavenly father, that I didn't need a man to fulfill me. And so after I really took my faith seriously, I went back to church because I grew up in church, but it was very legalistic. Once I got that relationship with God, I took that and I ran, like I was just on fire for the Lord. I put myself in church all the time. I was in small groups. I led small groups,
Mhm.
just doing anything I could to get close to the Lord. And I love that you said during the pandemic, like you were in your Bible so much, and like my story was the same. Like during the pandemic, having so much time just with the Lord, it grew so much of an intimacy.
Mhm.
It healed things in me, that I needed to heal from. And that really was just surrendering it to the Lord to go to his feet and lay things down. And to be able to be even self-aware, asking the Lord, what are the things? Reveal to me the things that I need to work on. Reveal to me the things that are hindering me to walk forward, and reveal those things that I haven't surrendered to you and that I need to heal from. And asking yourself questions, if all of a sudden I would get really mad at something, I'd be like, why am I so mad at this? Oh, it's because I'm triggered because this happened and this happened in my life that actually has led to this. Ask yourself questions. I get so self-aware of you that you're able to communicate that to someone else, because the worst thing ever is getting into a relationship with another flawed human being, not having that self-realization, and now you're snapping at each other and you don't even know why.
Yeah.
It's like the moments that we have, like, and we never really yelled at each other or gotten like mad at each other, but the moments that like I get upset or like have a breakdown or whatever, I'm able to pinpoint like, oh, this is why. Or if there's like certain phrases that you've said in the past where I'm like,
Mhm.
that actually triggers me, so we can't frame it like this, and it triggers me because of A, B, and C. So one of the things is like around food and diets and like talking about that. I grew up in a home where, the diet culture was real. And I always felt like I wasn't good enough. I always felt like I needed to lose weight. I always felt like I needed to be better and improve. And so the mention of diets, we don't talk about diets.
Mm.
Even the word diet, I hate it. It's healthy eating because I want to live a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah.
This is why we do that, not because we're on a diet, not because we need to lose weight because we want to be healthy.
Yeah.
And even working with a health coach right now that I am, that's something I've even had to talk to her and tell her, like, I don't want you to call it a diet. I don't want you to say that I'm losing weight or that we're working to lose weight. No, we're working to be healthy.
Mm.
Diet culture is real. I mean, so many people struggle with it. And so that was just one example of like conversations that came up because we come from very different backgrounds. I again grew up in that culture, but then when I was on my own, really strived to be healthy, strive to eat healthy. It was a lot easier when I was in Canada and didn't live to the south where everything is biscuits and fried chicken. you know? And so when we got
Yeah.
married, like your habits come into play with each other. And so habits that I had worked on for so long in my life started slipping because we were always going out to eat. We're always having date nights. We're always doing this. We ate out of convenience, not out of health. And so really had to communicate and have those conversations because the habits you establish in your singleness will absolutely come into your marriage.
Yeah.
And so that was one area that I felt like I was like, I am not okay with how we're living, and we need to reevaluate. We need to sit down. We need to talk about this, why it's important, and then we need to do something about it. And this is a big reason we hired a health coach is because we want to, in our marriage, establish healthy lifestyle so
Yeah.
that we have that longevity, so we have energy to do the work God has called us to. And we really had to sit down and figure that out because he comes from a background of like, he's never had to worry about weight. He hasn't ever even thought about weight. He had opposite, really. He's like, hey, how can I gain weight?
Mm.
And it's so opposite than what I was used to. And so coming together, we had to really establish those things. And so yeah, I would say look at the habits in your life. And do you like the habits that you're doing now? Because that will translate into your marriage and sometimes not as a good thing. Like
Mhm.
his healthy, non-healthy habits didn't work with me. And so it's like, okay, do we want to in 5 years from now just be this couple that feels really sluggish because we're just eating crap all the time?
Mm.
No, we didn't want to be that. So we're like, okay, let's reevaluate this. Let's figure it out now as we're walking into marriage so that we are establishing those habits together, not just me having my own habits and you having your own habits because we'll always fall into each other's habits. We're one now. And so that those were things I established being fit and active and healthy and having to translate that into marriage. And so yeah, look at the habits in your life and do you like them? And if you don't, then work on shifting them before you get into relationship and figuring out why those are important to you. I knew having a healthy lifestyle was important to me. I've always known that, so I was able to communicate that very early on before letting things slide so far gone that now you can't get back to where you started.
Wow, it's fun being on here.
Yeah.
I think I learned something too just listening to you. Yeah, that's really good. And I would say it's not just food. Like
No.
it's shopping, it's money, it's
Finances.
all the
That's a
things.
big one.
Like you're coming together as one human being, one person. So,
Are you going to be an asset to that person or are you going to be liability to that
ooh, that's
person?
good.
And this is how, we've talked about this lately. One of the things that we think is our greatest asset and greatest liability is we're both go-getters and we're both busy and we're both want to like be moving forward. And that's great, but sometimes you need rest. Um,
Yes.
and so like going into the point of finances and shopping habits and things like that is like have seen people literally walk from their singleness with piles of debt and horrible spending habits, and now you're literally getting married and they have to take that on. That's not fair to them.
Mm.
It's like the most beautiful thing when we met and once we talked about like finances, where we were, what that looked like, we were able to see each other's shopping habits. We were able to see like, and even now we budget every month and really look at like, hey, is there ways we can improve? What does that look like? But we're both on the same page about it. I'm not like, hey, babe, give me the Amex. I'm gonna go spend all the money. Like,
Yeah.
no, no, no. It's like, hey, okay, well, let's look at spending habits and let's evaluate like what does that look like? How do we get better?
Hmm.
Do we have to get better? And what's good, what's not? And so the beautiful thing when we got together, once we had those conversations, was really when we got married, we both felt like we were gaining an inheritance, which was amazing, because he had stewarded his money really well in finances. I have stewarded my money really well in finances, and we both had great habits. And now bringing that together, we actually get to propel even more further together
Hmm.
than separately, which is so cool.
Yeah.
And I do want to say too, for some of you that may be listening and you're like, well, I have school debt, that's just not me. And that's okay. But let's evaluate what are your habits around money now. Like,
Hmm.
it's not a bad thing to be in debt over certain things, right? Like, but it's like, what are your habits now? Are you working to pay those things off? Or are you just, you know, spending money everywhere which way you can?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say is, are you stewarding that debt well? Like, are you paying it off and making payments and making additional payments if you can? Or are you out on a spending spree, buying new clothes and eating out all the time and then saying, and then almost complaining like, well, I have all this debt. Well, yeah, you do, but you can make some lifestyle changes and still do those fun things, but pay off the debt that you have.
Yeah, I think like we both have had school debt before,
Yeah.
which we both paid off before we
Mhm.
ever got married. Which was awesome.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about is I don't know if you told me this or who you heard it, maybe somebody you were working with, but that they had like thousands of dollars in debt. And the person that they married like had no idea until like a year or two into marriage and they're like, what do you mean we're like $45,000 or maybe it was even hundreds of $1,000s. Like those are when Michelle was talking earlier, we did this book, like those are things that for us was like you're not talking about those things. Like, what do you mean you don't know that you're hundreds of $1,000s in debt and you're stepping into marriage? Like, I think that those are the things that are important because it's okay, well, how are we going to come together? Because it's not like that's not gonna change,
Yeah.
right? Like when you come together, whatever those habits are, like you're just talking about, are
Hmm.
gonna come in and now the other person is going to be either affected by it or they're going to have to come in and you're going to work together to figure it out. And
Yeah,
working together can sometimes be hard when one person's one side and the other person the other side.
totally.
So, yeah, it's
Well, it just adds unnecessary tension that
yeah,
you can avoid
yes,
if you work on this in your singleness.
100%.
And I think that's taking inventory of every
Yeah,
area of your life,
yeah,
whether it's your physical health, like I talked about, your, health, wellness. What does that look like? What habits have you established? Because again, once you get married, it's like you take on the other person's habits. If I wouldn't have ever had those healthy habits, how could I then have those conversations with him and say, hey, I really want us to like be healthy as a marriage. So how do we move forward in this if I didn't have those habits? Finances, same thing. Like, what do my habits look like? Best way to find out your habits, just budget. You literally go through everything you spend in a month, add it up in different categories. We do this every at the end of every month, and we see, okay, where are we spending money? Where do we need to spend less money?
yeah,
What does that look like in our budgets? Do that as a single before you ever do that as a marriage, because it'll
yeah,
be so much easier to bring that in and say like, okay, let's sit down every month. We know exactly how much money we have. And I hate this. We did a table talk on this actually on and the comment came up and a lot of people are like, oh, I'd hate for a woman to make more money than the man, da 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 da, whatever. Y'all are one now.
yeah.
It don't matter who makes
No,
more money because it's all going in the same pot. And if you have separate finances, you shouldn't,
no,
because literally you are one. You need to work
together,
together
you're a
on the
team.
finances. And that was probably one of the hardest things for me walking into marriage, was joining our
Yeah,
finances, because I have been on my own since a very young age and I have had to work very hard at everything I've done because I've had no backup plan. I've had nothing to fall back on. I've had no like comfortability. I couldn't just be like, "Oh, parents, I'm broke. I'm coming back home." And so there was always like a forward moving motion, and that's how I've always been. And so and I think it's still something that challenges me, and it's something that I'm still getting used to, but it's so much beneficial when you can like sit down, you can discuss, you can be like, wow, look at where we are. Are we moving forward every month? Are we moving backward every month? What does that look like? And how do we grow and move forward always? And so, for us, like that's been awesome to be able to get used to that thing because it's not easy. It's not easy to come by your finances, but you are one. So his habits become my habits. If he goes out and spends thousands of dollars, that's on me now because that's my money as well. And so, it's not that he's bringing in and it's something he's had to remind me of lately. Sometimes I'm like his paycheck and he's like, no, it's our paycheck.
Mhm.
We got like a tax refund and he's like, no, it's our tax refund.
Mhm.
You got a bonus at work and it was
It's
like,
our bonus.
no, it's our bonus.
Mhm.
It's not he goes to work and makes this much money and it's like for the business, it's our business.
Mhm.
This is our business finances. And so, he gets to see all of that and I get to see all of that because it's all combined. And I think that's so important because so often people leave things separate and somebody doesn't know what's going on and it's gonna add so much more tension than if it's just transparent
Mhm.
at any point of time. I mean, literally, like I said, every month we write down everything. We see where we spend. We budget everything accordingly. We write down like how much, money we have, and it's transparent. It's there. It's for both of us to see at any point of time.
Mhm.
And I think it's just, yeah, by not doing that or by separating like, oh, it's his money and what I earn is my money, it's allowing so much more tension to come into the relationship that doesn't need to be.
Yeah, because you're gonna have those thoughts of like, oh, what is she spending money on? And like we have accounts that we're both on, and like it's transparent, which is great. The one thing I wanted to say though is it kind of comes full circle of what you're saying is like doing the work. You're able to recognize, why am I like this with money? Why
100%.
is that? Well, you don't understand that unless you put the work in and really get to the root of like, okay, why do I feel this way? Um, so, and then the other thing I thought of when you were talking is like, I don't want anyone listening to think that, oh, well, they're not working through any problems now because they worked through everything before they got married. I'm
That's
here to tell
yeah.
you that like you're still going to have problems. You're still going to work through things, but they're not going to be half as hard. It's going to be
Yeah.
little things that you just have to work through and you've already put the work in. So it's just communicating at that point
Yeah.
of like, oh, okay, this is why I felt this way. Okay, boom, and you move on.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up because yeah, it doesn't mean that oh, I've done all the work and I'm never going to have another issue. It's like things come up. But
Yeah.
again, being so self-aware and doing the work, it's like we're able to recognize those things. Like I said, when all of a sudden we're getting married and we're having to join our finances and I'm feeling like, "Oh, there's a little tension of like, this feels scary to me." It's like, "Oh, I'm able to recognize why I felt that way walking into it." Doesn't mean those things won't come up in 5, 10 years from now.
Yeah.
It's like, but it's going back to the why of like, oh, I'm feeling this tension or I'm feeling this trigger. Okay, let's actually just ask myself questions so that I can better communicate to him why I'm feeling this. And it doesn't have to be this blown up argument about it
Mhm.
or this big old fight. It's just simply a conversation because we've done the work. And
Yeah.
so I think that's been a huge revelation that we've had. I love that you mentioned you've read a lot of books and stuff on dating and
Mhm.
just spiritual growth as well, and I was able to recognize that very early on when I met him, like he's done the work. And that was awesome. But also that he was his own person. And again, that goes back to being so self-aware. Like I'm aware, like I remember specific questions about the future before I answered them because a lot of my previous relationships, people would just tell me what I want to hear, or they'd like agree with, like just be agreeable rather than like have their own idea of what they want and like where they're headed in the future. I think that's so important that we know what we want, because then when we communicate it, it's not just agreeing with each other, but it's really understanding like, hey, this is where I'm headed. I mean, for me, I think that's why none of my other relationships ever worked out, because we were not heading in the same direction. But when I met Douglas, I knew very quickly, like on, that this man was going to help propel me into everywhere that God had me. And I'd never met that before. I never met that before. And it wasn't that he was just agreeing with me. He literally had his own ideas of like growth, of what that looks like, of things he wanted to accomplish. And I was like, hey, yeah, that aligns with what I want to accomplish as well. And so we were able to recognize very early on how aligned we truly were.
Hmm. Yeah. The other thing I thought of was we played a game called We're Not Really Strangers early on in our dating. And the one thing I think that has helped us immensely is kind of what we've talked about is doing the work. But what that looks like is really understanding the other person. Like I know everything about Michelle. There's not one thing that I don't know about her. Like
I
I
mean, I
know
think we learn things all the
yeah,
time.
but I'm saying like their struggles, like her past, like what did she work like what did she go through? Like why is she the way she is? Like herself wholly I knew and she knew everything about me. She knew my struggles. She knew everything. So it's not like something 3 years down the road something's going to come up and be like, "Well, you never told me about that. Like why didn't you talk about like I'm telling you those things will come up if you don't talk about them because
Yeah.
that's what the enemy wants. He wants division. He wants
Hmm.
all of that. Like he's going to use those things and they're only going to get exemplified. Is that the right word? Exemplified? I think so.
Amplified.
Amplified. There you go. If like when you are one because that's he's trying to separate you. So
Yeah.
I would say, like we've talked about is using your like dating to get to know somebody and as it progresses like get to know the other person because you are going to be one like you're a unit, you're a team
Hmm.
and you are going to fight for one another and if you don't want to fight for the other person like or go through those things or if something bad comes up well you got to fight like you
Yeah.
have to work through it and so I think that
Yeah,
was
and I
big
think
for us.
walking with someone while going through something. I think that was a big thing too. I think that that was like the first time we recognized like that, wow, there's something here,
Yeah.
was like when I was at an event and we were feeding the homeless and my back like went out on me and I literally couldn't walk for like 3 days afterwards, and he just like loved on me and took care of me and like was there for everything that I needed. Literally, as I can barely move, he's like sitting there going to get food and going to get meds and like going to get things, and like truly in that moment I was like, this man will take care of me through the good and the bad. Not just someone who's going to be there through like the happy, joyful, like fun moments,
Hmm.
but like actually walking through things. And so yes, we got engaged quickly and we got married quickly, but we also went through things. Like it's
Hmm.
not like that we hadn't ever dealt with anything or everything just been like we're on cloud nine and like, oh, lovey-dovey and this is great, honeymoon stage.
Yeah.
Like it was like we actually went through hard things,
Yeah.
and we're able to recognize and see each other's character throughout those things. So that was a big part of it as well. But I do believe we're running out of time.
This has been so good. Oh
But
man.
I think we can do part two. I
Yeah.
think we have a lot more to talk about.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about singleness, how you can prepare in your singleness this week. And maybe the next week we'll talk about marriage, some of the realities of marriage,
Mm,
some of the things that maybe have come up since we've gotten married, not just like
yeah.
things in our dating. Because I think these podcasts are really beneficial. Maybe you haven't heard these things before, and maybe you don't know how to start preparing and like
Mm,
practically what that looks like. So tune back in next week and we'll do a part two series. Yeah, preparing for marriage. So good. Well,
all
thanks
right.
all for tuning in and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of An Apple a Day. If you liked today's episode, why don't you go like it, share it, subscribe, maybe even send it to a friend, and don't forget to review us. It helps so much. We look forward to seeing you next week, same time, same place on An Apple a Day podcast.